Hello everyone, welcome back to the Trailmaker videos. In our developer series, we are going to study variables today. Variables are a very important part of your code. So far in the videos, we have been creating these variables and we have been talking about these variables. Today, we are going to understand them in a more better fashion and understand, what happens when we declare a variable in Salesforce Apex. So as we all know, Apex is based on Java, is an extension of Java, is an enhanced version of Java. So what we do here is most of the writing style of Apex is very similar to Java. So hence, when we declare a variable in Salesforce, it is declared in the Java style syntax. So which basically means when we write an integer, so integer I is equal to 0. That's exactly very similar to the way you would write in Java. String str, list string str list, set map. We have written all of these variables. We have created all of these variables in live code in previous videos. If you haven't checked the previous videos, please go and check them. So if you want to declare multiple variables, you can do it like this, ijk. We have tried this as well. We have seen this in our previous videos as well. How do you would do that? These are just a simple ways of creating those variables. Variables are required to store a particular value in your code, and then to keep that value within RAM memory, you use those variables to run your business logic. So basically, if I try to explain it to you in simple form, so this is one of my favorite tools to just quickly draw anything, and it's like a whiteboard which I like using. Basically, I was trying to explain you a couple of things in Salesforce and why you need variable and what is RAM again in terms of Salesforce style. We use this circle as a database. So this is our database. Then we have, this is our, let's say, heap space, or in simpler terms, if you want to call it RAM. Then obviously we would have a processor here. And then at the top of it, I'll just make it a different box. So this is where you would have Apex language. This is where your, let's say, the Salesforce UI sits. What Salesforce uses is it's called an MVC model. So what Salesforce uses is it's called an MVC model. It's called model view controller. So what is model? Model is your database where you store the data, right? So database is all the objects that you create in Salesforce, and then you have relationship between those objects, lookup, master, detail, junction, and all of that. So that is your database model. View is the UI. So that is your view. And the controller is your Apex and your flows and workflows. All of those are controllers. So basically what you do is you read the data, you read limited set of data from the database, you show it in a particular format on the UI. So let's say you are showing a data table, you are showing an edit page, you are showing a view page, and all of that. So, that's what your model view controller is. Now, when we talk about Apex code, so primarily we are talking about these three things. What happens is when you write a business logic, so what you need to do is you need to pull, whenever you are writing code, you would do two things. Either you would read some information from database, you'll play around with that information, you'll run that business logic on it, and then you would update that particular data within Salesforce. The another thing that you would do is you get the information from the UI, you run some logic on it, and then you go and update the database. So these are the two basic forms when your Apex code will run. What happens is you cannot do an operation directly from the database, right? So what you need to do is you need to pull your set of records into memory. So because Salesforce is cloud based, you would not call that RAM straight away RAM. It's called the heap space or the heap storage. You get 12 MB of heap storage for every Apex transaction. For each transaction, you get 12 MB of storage space. So if your heap storage passes 12 MB, then you get a view state error. So hence you need to control that using limits if you are pulling a lot of data into from database into your heap space. Usually you won't run into that unless you are dealing with thousands of records. Only then that come, but then you would use batch class or something to handle that. So coming back, why we need variable. So variables are required because when you need to pull some information out from the database, you need to run some logic on it. But what you do is you first pull that information out, you put it in your RAM, and then you run your business logic. And then once your logic is done, you do a DML operation, which is database manipulation, and then you pass those changes back to database. So your database is always the source of truth. Whatever logic or whatever changes you want to do, you do in these three places: Apex, Salesforce UI, and RAM. This is where you can make these changes. And in the end, whenever your all the logic and changes are complete, you push it back to database. Processor helps us in doing all of these actions together. I hope this would have made a few things clear. Go back and understand our variables. So I think now you would understand why we need a variable in our Apex code. So variable basically would store data or some information related to that data which you want, which you would use in your business logic, in your code to execute that logic. So basically, if you write the list string str list, this is just the declaration. And if you do new list string with the constructor, this is basically the initialization. This is just telling the compiler that there is a variable called strlist available. But when you initialize it, you get a memory space available for it in the heap or the RAM, as you would call it. That's the difference between a declaration and the initialization. You can do it together. That's what we would have seen in the code so far, which I have written. So we do the declaration and the initialization at the same time. This is always a best practice because if you do that and later on you forget doing the initialization, you may run into errors and then you'll be like, what is happening in my code? So it's always a best practice that you initialize your variables whilst you declare them. That's the safer method to do. It is very important to understand what null is. So null is, no matter how good you would write a code, you will encounter null pointers in your code journey someday or the other. So null pointer errors are very important and you need to handle them very nicely. Otherwise, null pointer error, if your code is giving null pointer errors, then it basically means that you have not written a code in a good way. You would come across null pointers when you start writing code, and you would definitely come across. It's like the most obvious error that would come in your, what basically null variable is, what is a null pointer, and what basically how do you handle it. So null variables and initial values. So if you declare a variable and do not initialize it with a value, it will be null. So basically, if you declare a value or declare a variable and you do not initialize it, it will have a null value. So what basically means, if I just do that and if I say str list dot get zero, then I would get a null pointer error. That's exactly what would happen. Go and try do that in your developer console and you'll get that error. That basically means, so null basically means that there is no value for that particular instance. So there's in the list at zero, there's no value available. Hence, I'm getting a null pointer error. So what can happen is, so you can assign null any particular variable which is declared of primitive type. So you can also say null to a Boolean variable as well. So it can be true, false, or null. So this is a trick question. If you might get an interview. So what all values Boolean can store? So Boolean generally, if you go by layman terms, it would be just true and false, right? 0 and 1. That's what Boolean is. In Apex, it can also store a null value. Null value basically means it is not initialized in the memory as yet. There's no memory allocation. There's no value inside it. It's all blank. I hope it makes sense so far. So that's the difference between the null variable or the null value. So basically, there's no value inside it and hence it's null. That's the idea. So here's just an example of showing you how you would run into null pointer exceptions, which I have explained it to you in multiple previous videos and just now as well. Scope of the variable. Scope of the variable is very, very important to understand. So if you declare a variable inside the curly braces of a particular code, that's the limit of that particular variable to be available. If like this integer I, because this is outside this curly braces, so you cannot declare another integer I here. And let's say if you declare another integer within this curly braces called integer j, then you cannot use that variable outside these curly braces. So that's basically the scope of your variable, how long it can be used. So you can have an integer j here, and you can also have an integer j outside it. So that's basically outside of this scope, your curly braces, that's the scope of that particular or the block of statement, compiler will not find that particular variable. That particular variable is only limited to that block of statements. So if a variable is in class A, you can have the same variable in of the same name in class B as well, and that particular variable would just be limited to class A or class B. So that's just the way of understanding of your scope of your variable. So it's just limited to within these curly braces. You cannot say that it is available anywhere else. No, it would just be available within those curly braces. Coming up to next, Apex is also case sensitive. So if you write something is wrong on the screen on the slide, so Apex is case insensitive. So if you write string S, or you would write string S1 or string S2, like here, everything is same. I'll just change it. So Apex is case insensitive. Apex is case insensitive. So basically, if you write string S or string S1 or string S2, all of these are valid. This is not a problem. They all are same. And hence, if you call integer I and integer small I, this would run into an error because it is case insensitive. So capital I and small I are considered same variable names in Apex. This is not the case in Java, but Apex does consider the uppercase and lowercase as the same. But prefer, if you are creating your variable as small S1, then keep it small s1 across your code. That would help the person who's going to read the code after 6 months you have written your code to help it to understand it in a better way. We'll talk about what are the best practices of writing the variable names and all of that, your class names, but let's just understand how do we write the code right now. Constants are another important set of variables which you declare at the top of your Apex class outside all of your methods. These constants are available across all the methods within your class, and they are always declared as static final, and then you give the data type. The name of these variable is always capital, like full cap, no small case or title case or camel case. It's all full caps with minimal abbreviations. And if like it's saying private integer constant, so you would, instead of putting it all together, you use underscore between two words. That's the way of writing a constant. Why a constant is required? So let's say you need to use 200 somewhere in your Apex code. Let's say you need to fetch 200 records from the database, and then you need to run a loop on those 200 records, and you only want 200 records to come, no more, no less. So then basically you would use an integer constant, something like this, what is written on the screen. And you would create your variable like this. So it is very, very important to understand how you would create your constants. And trust me, constants are very important part of any good Apex code that is written. We'll see how do we use it in coming videos when we write more complex business logic. But for now, it is very important to understand how we declare a constant in our Apex code. So you use static final. Final basically means the value will not change now. So final is a keyword, and it basically says that once I've given this particular variable a value 200, this value will not change till the time this particular Apex code is running. So in this particular transaction, the value of this particular constant is not allowed to change, right? If you try to change it in your Apex code, it will throw out an error. Static basically means that keep this variable value in the memory as long as this particular transaction is running. Whether or not I'm referencing this variable in the memory, this will stay in the memory for the whole transaction. So let's say you save a particular record from the UI on Salesforce. Behind that, there are a couple of Apex classes running. So let's say there are 5 Apex classes running when you click save on the UI. So if one of them has static variable, then that variable will stay for the whole transaction. Not just when that Apex class is running, it will stay for the whole transaction. So do not create a list or a map which is static, because that may cause, then it may end up using a lot of your heap space, and then you may run into errors of storage issues. Hence, you need to understand how much your heap storage is available. But otherwise, if you are using some, strings in your code, you have put in within single quotes in your code, it's better to put them as a constant, static constant in your Apex class at the top, so that if in future somebody wants to come and change, they can just change at the top level, and wherever that particular variable is referenced multiple times in your Apex code. They just change it at one place and a whole code starts to understand that particular change. So it's a way of making your code more maintainable, more scalable, and easier to understand. I hope you would have understood now the importance of having variables and the constant variables in your Apex code and how do you declare them. So wishing you best in your Salesforce journey. If you have any questions or any comments, please reach out to me. If you do like the video, please press the subscribe button and share it within your friend circle. That would really give me some motivation to create more such videos. Thank you and have a nice day.